All right, everyone. So I'm John Ashurst. I am the research director at Kingman Regional Medical Center in Northern Arizona. And today we're going to be talking about research for every hospital. And what we're going to do is, with our presenters, talk about a rural community and university approach to research. So I'm just going to go through some slides here. So the main objectives, as you can see, is to talk about the different resources that are available at the different hospital settings in order to help you build a research department. Also to help you know what current resources that we have and to design a program to help you utilize what you have at your hospital. So the panelists, like I said, I'm John Ashurst. We work at Kingman Regional Medical Center, and we do have Dr. Marna Greenberg at Lehigh Valley Health Network and Dr. Chad Kraus from the Geisinger Health System. So we don't have any conflicts to disclose at this time in regards to this presentation, but all of it, much like most researchers, we do have some disclosures because we do work with the different drug companies, but it won't affect anything at this time, given that we're going to be talking about how to build your research department. All right, so these things that when I think of research and why you need to have your own department within the EM is because, you know, with the single accreditation system, what we see is that there was a hard time of many community hospitals that had emergency medicine residencies meeting the requirements needed for scholarly activity. When you look at community and rural places, the resources just aren't there that typically are seen at urban and academic hospitals. And also, as we keep going, you know, whenever we look at the loss of the protected time, you really need to have people at an institution that can really build a research network and help you meet the scholarly activity requirements in these hard times. So what I'm going to do is actually hand it over to Dr. Greenberg, and she's going to talk about the community approach.
Good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying some lunch break while we talk about research. I'll tell you a little bit about my shop. I'm the vice chair of Department of Emergency and Hospital Medicine, specific to research. We are a multi-site network at Lehigh Valley in Allentown, Pennsylvania. But we have probably two of the sites have the most scholarly activity generated, and those are that I'll speak to the most. The first is a suburban level 1 trauma center that sees about 90,000 patients visits a year in the ED of all ages. And the second is a suburban site that sees maybe between 50 and 60,000 patients a year. We're a residency that is dual accredited, which doesn't mean much anymore since we're all together, but we've had a long-standing history of both DOs and MDs in our program. In the historical sense, that meant that our residents had to have a paper of publishable quality for all of them, 56 residents, 17 faculty, 2 toxicology fellows, and 1 new ultrasound fellow had to have scholarly activities. So as John mentioned, a lot of this was geared toward what were accrediting bodies requirements. And our approach started with a single person, that was me, and 1 coordinator in the beginning. And I'm going to try to help you evolve into the next few minutes about how to scaffold that into much more of a powerhouse. So our structure has 2 arms. One is idea leadership. That would be the the provider, physicians, ideas leadership, whether it's a resident, a medical student, a physician, and our operations leadership. That those 2 arms work beside each other, and at the top of their tiers, their level of knowledge have equal balance in deciding what projects we take on. Operations does things like the enrollment, they hire the coordinators, they are doing the staffing, they help to write the grants, they might even help with writing and peer review responses. So operations is almost sometimes more important than our ideas. We can have a great idea, but if we don't have the operations team to execute it, we may not get very far. So those 2 work together. We work with, in a structure in which we monthly have meetings, which is probably not unusual for ER, but we've split ours into the scientific review meeting, which is the true department chairs and vice chairs, where we've already vetted things and they're at that point coming through to make sure that our department knows what research projects will be happening around them, and what our goals are with those projects. It also is the place where if we need help from the chair to advocate or navigate through legal problems, through IRB challenges, it's where we use our communications. It's also where we broadcast, and I'm going to make an emphasize the point as we move forward. To build a structure means that you have to market for yourself, not just in grant writing, but you have to market with yourself internally for the resources to continue to be attributed to you. What do you bring to the team? And so that opportunity is that at that meeting to make sure we do shout outs to every person. Big deal. Shout outs to every person that I can't give time or money, but we can give kudos to for the work they're doing to help promote scholarly activity in the department. The real work is done probably the hour before that, the executive research team. So I'm the vice chair. We have an associate director of research. We also have the toxicology division assistant director of research, and we have an assistant program director for the residency for research. Those people have a total of about 16 hours of protected time, of which really is a fair amount of faculty. Who knows what that will be? We're expecting a cut, not just in hours, but in redeployment with some of the changes that are going on, a redeployment of those resources from a paper publishable quality to a diluted type of work product from us. And so with that, resources will be moved to other time, particularly will be moved to other directions. So that executive team does a very important, vital service. It serves hospital medicine also to say, we know we can't do every idea, but every idea we start, we finish, and we want to make sure that we pick the right ones and we have the right resources for it. Next slide, please. So growth is going to be dependent in your shop for maximizing resources. And that means we have to get everybody that can work for free to do so. It's also meant on having champions that help you market. And I give the story of this. So most SWATs of residency programs are not coming back and saying, give me more opportunities to do research. Most faculty are not saying, hey, give me more opportunities, right? So we have to almost market ourselves, that we know our value. So I'm preaching to the choir, but how do we make others see that value? And so it's not hard for me to look at some of the other people on the panel and know the value of this, because trainees come out to lead national level research from our program. But what do I do with the person who maybe is not so motivated, that might not be the champion? Recently, one of our graduates was just finishing her residency and presented at an ASAP workshop, ASAP poster, and it happened to be, she's very motivated in a pre-hospital realm. So what her interest is in pre-hospital. She would not have been so interested in research. She was mentored by one of our great faculty members who had her practice, had her work. She presented very well at ASAP, and the moderator particularly was impressed to say, hey, we are learning that Narcan doesn't have to be given by a medical provider, that even police or whoever's the nearest bystander can administer this safely. She felt really good about the presentation. When she walked out, then afterwards, she's like, I get it. I know now why you are so excited about research, because I felt like I was changing the path and the trajectory of patients at a national level, way different than I was when I was just talking to my EMS crews in my group in my town. So now what do I do with that story? Well, I tell it to you, but more importantly, I get her to tell it, right? The person who is not so much so motivated. She has to tell everybody that growth she experienced and what it was. And so we praise her, we acknowledge her, we spread it like wildfire, and we get people to ask her about her experience. Because if it comes from the least, not the most motivated, the least, not everybody's ever going to join our bandwagon, but those will create a climate of scholarly activity that grows. You have to have resources. Finding resources is a challenge always. We use a lot of students in our work also, or per diem people that are interim gap years between student and doctorate level. We use all of those to be visible, and to be visible means you're valuable. And so that means picking projects for us, at least at the community hospital. It probably means we're never going to have the paper in the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA. It probably means we're not going to have the biggest randomized controlled trial because we don't have those resources. But when my chair complains that his biggest gripe is that he can't get beds turned over, and he thinks it's because we don't have enough CT techs or the CT time. One of my partners calls this quality improvement on steroids, is research. I love that, right? Yes, let us bring it to you. Let us show you that actually it isn't a new CTR you need. It's actually more nursing, or it's actually I needed more beds, because I can control the confounders in that flow. So if I bring you to the table and solve your problems, I have now become visible and valuable. And I think that's going to be the key to our future. The researchers will come to you if you prove your value. Next slide, please. I do think at a community hospital, we have to fight a lot harder for funding, particularly. It's going to be unrealistic for us to get high level federal funds for a lot of our projects. But we've built a lot of relationships with our universities, even though we aren't one per se. Lehigh University is by us. They happen to have health systems engineers. Those health systems engineers have professors who have mad skills at analytics. So we share our student combined. They're working on capstone. They need a project. They're faculty. We, just like the one I mentioned, we need to turn around our pod faster. We need to make help them do a modeling for us that helps us determine our answers. Let them be a presenter on one of the abstracts that comes from that at their conferences. So collaborations is very important. Small grants are very effective also for us. I don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars. Don't tell my boss. 2,500, 5,000, maybe even 10,000 will pay me a research assistant, which is what I need the most. I need those minds and hands to help us keep the engine turning. Don't underestimate non-research industry funds. All of those big companies that are putting money, and I won't name them, but you can talk to me afterwards if you want some ideas. All those big industries that are putting money into research also have departments of quality improvement. They have vested interest in the topics that you're interested in solving for your patients, and there are great channels for resources that can help you. You develop the relationships. They're impressed with you, that you complete what you start, what you promise you deliver, and they'll work with you again. The other part that we've been very successful about is your community health department and county resources. I think those are underestimated in community research programs, and I really want to emphasize it. So pre-COVID, there were a fair number of federal dollars that were being presented to the state level, which then filtered to the county to solve the opioid overdose problem. So the county's sitting with funds, but doesn't have good evidence-based guidelines of how to use them to solve the problem. So be ready. Yes, we have it. We have a program that we'd like to implement, but we need funding to help us on opioid stewardship for physicians. We have a program on a discharge program for how to get Narcan kits into the hands of families for members, but we need resources to help us. Deliver what you promise, and they come back. And now the next one, I promise you, whatever our county gets money for, they trust us that if we have an idea, they'll help support it because we give them the numbers and the valuables to put back up the food chain to the state and to the feds to be able to funnel more funding for them. So that's been very successful for us. Next slide, please. So the community approach also has to use faculty alignments of senior members with novice scholars. And so teaching becomes a big part of that. I can't do all of the work. I have to spread that out, right? So I'm the 5 of us that are on our senior member are always a mentor usually with the junior faculty. We usually stack that heavily. There's a fellow, resident, couple of them, and a student. The students with the people with the scholarly requirement will drive the project. So if the student has a higher bar, meaning they want to get into residency, they will drive the project harder than perhaps a resident who's kind of tagging along, or faculty who really doesn't maybe want to be there at all. So stacking those is important. I will tell you just one diversion on the students that we found successful. I absolutely cannot promise. These projects take years. There's no way that a student that comes to us for a year can expect to be a first author on a paper of an idea that we've started. So we are pretty clear about that from the very beginning. They'll be acknowledged for the work they do, but authorship is not guaranteed. But I personally invest in them, is it will help them usually be first author on a case report, get it published somewhere so that they have a couple things when they're on an interview season that they can share or on their CV. And the next slide, and then I'll sign off to the next team, is I'd just like to give you some pearls after decades of working in this business. The first thing to success wherever you are is a timeline. So that timeline, the difference between an email that says to an author or group that says, can you review and get back to me your track changes, versus, can you get back to me by May 17th at 5 p.m. your changes? If this timeline doesn't work for you, please approach me individually. Reply all with your track changes. Now, for our faculty, we have an agreement that says, we also put in there, if we don't hear from you, we presume you're okay with the changes and your name and credentials as demonstrated on this paper. So that if I have 11 authors, maybe one or two have already worked hard on the inception, the development, they've enrolled, but they may not be critical parts of all elements of the revision process or the final seal. They may have even written a part, but they don't need to go back to their part. That, I think, has been very effective to us, because then I meet monthly with my operations director and we go through the list, which she provides me, not for every case report, but for these projects that we have, which is about, on any given time, about 17 to 20 projects. Are we in the green, the yellow, or the red for the timeline? If we're in green, we don't even talk about it. Yellow, give me a heads up. What's the stumbling block? Well, it was COVID. We couldn't enroll. Okay, got it. Move on. If we're red, is it a PI that we're waiting for? Did they not do their job? How can I help? What barrier are you on? So I think that running that list helps, and having those color coding has been very effective. I mentioned already, I can't emphasize it enough. Finish what you start, publish your negative results. I do not have the time or the resources to invest and fail to report on what I found, even if it's a negative result. I mentioned already, using imaging case reports helps your student buy-in. And I close again with the fuel for community research, or really research in general, is going to be your timeline. Thank you for your time. And I think I'm going to pass it off to university next. Dr. Krause.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And a big thanks to Dr. Ashurst for putting this together, and for Dr. Greenberg and Dr. Ashurst to let me join this with them. It's a great panel, and to all of you for being on to discuss this important topic. So my name is Chad Krause. I'm the System Director of Emergency Medicine Research at Geisinger, which is, I think, now the 23rd or 24th largest health system in the United States. And we're in rural Pennsylvania, in Danville, as our headquarters, with about 12 hospitals and a large integrated health system, including an insurance arm. And so I think much of what Dr. Greenberg just discussed, and much of what Dr. Ashurst is going to discuss next in the rural part, you're going to hear a lot of overlap and a lot of redundancy. And part of the reason that is because all of us are trying to accomplish the same mission. And what's unique is in each of our settings, how we accomplish that mission, although the goal that we're trying to reach is the same. And so much of what you're going to hear across the three platforms is the same. So at Geisinger, again, we're a large health system, which absorbed a medical school about 5 years ago. And so, as with most institutions, but particularly in a university setting, there's multiple missions at work at the same time, of which you're a part. So for us, it's clinical, it's training programs, it's scholarship. We have sort of a unique situation in which we're an integrated health plan. So we have population health and utilization issues to consider as well. So the biggest strategy, I think, and overarching goal is how do we make emergency medicine and emergency medicine scholarly activity the right resource in the right place at the right time. So Dr. Greenberg talked a lot about their research committee structure at Lehigh Valley. Ours is very similar to that. A research committee is a really important part of your research enterprise. And I think the reason that it is twofold. And those are really the responsibility and accountability. And I'm not going to go into the sort of same detail that Dr. Greenberg did about timelines, et cetera, although I would highlight and affirm all of the things that were said about that. But for us, the research committee really is an opportunity to, for lack of a better term, provide a shark tank where ideas can be vetted, sort of the peer review before the peer review, where resources can be allocated, because all of us have finite resources, and where we can allocate those resources. And then accountability, but not in the term of a stick, but in term of a carrot. Whereas we can say to faculty, residents and other partners, where are we with these projects? What are the barriers you're experiencing, and how do we move things forward? So go ahead to the next slide, John. So probably the biggest impact in a university setting is how you have synergy with local and institutional goals. So how does emergency medicine scholarship and emergency medicine research fit into a larger institutional goals, the larger institutional enterprise? So John, if you could go to the next slide. So one example for us at Geisinger is MyCode, and MyCode is a large biobank, I think the largest biobank in the world actually, of about 275 enrolled participants. And this is probably the furthest thing many people would think of from emergency medicine research. This is very precision medicine, lab-based, essentially looking at genetic predispositions for a series of conditions that are genetically mediated and that might be modifiable via certain genetic mechanisms. So, and this has been about a 10-year or so project. Geisinger has a large, about 25-year history of clinical data in an administrative way. We were one of the first large health systems to use Epic. And so we have a population that doesn't move in or out very frequently. So there's essentially this huge database of clinical data in Epic upon which you can add all of these genetic factors and some really powerful research. So I bring this example up because one of the first things I did when I started at Geisinger was to approach our system leadership and say, is there any way that emergency medicine can integrate into the MyCode? How can we contribute, as well as are there opportunities for us? Excuse me. And one of the things we found, interestingly, and it sort of reaffirmed the population that we have, is that more than 60% of our emergency department patient population had already been approached for MyCode. And again, probably reinforcing how our population isn't all that mobile as far as inward or outward migration from our region. But it was at least an opportunity for me and for us as emergency medicine research to put ourselves on the map, on someone's radar, that, hey, emergency medicine's interested in our institutional goals, even though this particular project, we didn't necessarily have the ability to contribute significantly in a way as far as enrolling patients. However, going forward, there may be opportunities, and we're now on their mind and on the radar. So John, if you go to the next slide for me, that'd be great. So interdisciplinary collaboration. So I think this is extremely important, particularly in a large university setting. Dr. Greenberg talked about, their relationships at Lehigh Valley with Lehigh University. But it's really important across the whole institution. And sometimes it's very easy for cardiology to be doing research on patients in the emergency department with acute coronary syndromes, or for trauma to be looking at things, or neurology or neurosurgery, et cetera. And it's really important not only for those clinical interdisciplinary collaborations, but also for the non-clinical. So, Dr. Greenberg mentioned the systems engineer folks, or people who are developing medical devices, or even people who are doing humanities work, ethics, et cetera. There are essentially, as we all know, as emergency physicians and in emergency medicine, we have an opportunity to interact and touch almost every specialty and every discipline of academics and academia. And we really need to use the cliche, but think outside of the box as far as what might those collaborations be that we hadn't really thought of. So not all of the research that we do or scholarship that we pursue is sepsis or STEMIs, et cetera. There's a whole world of, social determinants of health, clinical ethics, et cetera, that we really can play a role in and help to drive. So that interdisciplinary collaboration, if you go to the next slide, John, not to focus too much on COVID, but this is just a slide of, we had a COVID-19 research oversight committee within our system, and the text are a little bit small to read here, but however, you can see, if you look, there's an entire interdisciplinary team, including folks who are experts in behavioral health and dynamics, not in behavioral health in a psychiatric context, but behavioral health on why do people make the choices they make, on game theory, on all of those sorts of things that drive decision making. And so this was and continues to be a really great and impactful way for us to look at as an enterprise. This is all the COVID research that's coming across our desk, and how do we fit this so that it really meets, again, institutional needs. And through this, we've really had a great opportunity as emergency medicine, not just to be visible across the institution, and to lead to other partnerships and to other work that we can do outside of COVID. And so again, this was a collaboration related to COVID, but that you really, again, Dr. Greenberg talks about finishing all the work you started. And I would expand on that point to say, use all the work you've started to create more work for the future. And so how do you not just finish the project today, but how does the project today provide the environment and the context for projects a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? So if you go to the next slide for me, John, please. So visibility, participation, recognition. I think Dr. Greenberg did a great job of discussing that. And I'll give you an example. We have a departmental research scholarly showcase day, which we just had last week. And as part of that, we included other health systems in our region that our medical students train at, and that although they have separate residency programs, our medical students go there. The faculty of those programs have faculty appointments through our medical school. And so how do we have, again, everyone participate to raise the visibility of the medical school, to recognize work that faculty in the medical school are doing? And that visibility and recognition and participation, again, is really important to say, this is what we're doing. And it is okay once in a while to brag about the great work you're doing. That's not a bad thing. That's really necessary. And maybe brag's not the right word. Maybe a humble brag is the right phrase. But it is really important to say, this is what we're doing. This is the great work that individuals and teams are doing. And again, that group dynamic and that this is what I'm doing, again, generates a lot of ideas and generates, I didn't realize you were doing that. That crosses with my interest. Maybe we can work together on something in the future. So it's not just a celebration, but again, that's extremely important. That recognition and celebration is extremely important. And it also, again, provides that context and environment where future work can be done. If you want to scroll, John, to the next slide. So again, how do we engage people across the whole educational spectrum? So Dr. Greenberg mentioned Lehigh University. We work with Bucknell University with their biomedical engineering students. And they've come up with some really cool projects over the course of the years. This year, we had a group that designed a TMJ dislocation simulation model. And it's incredible. And these students make me realize how I definitely have imposter syndrome, because they're way brighter and more creative than I ever could be. But a really great project and some really great ideas, not only for them to understand our work and our job, but to create something that is really usable and practical for residency programs and ultimately for patient care. You want to scroll, John? And then we talked to Dr. Greenberg mentioned a little about medical students. I think one of the values in a university type setting is you have the ability to create these longitudinal experiences, really to quote unquote capture the captive audience of a medical student at the beginning and take them through the whole process. So many medical schools have formal programs. So we have a summer research immersion program where students join with a faculty mentor for 8 to 10 weeks over the summer to work on a project. We currently have an inaugural medical research honors program, which will be longitudinal over the entirety of a medical student's time as a med student, where they'll engage in a research project. And again, the goal of all these is professional development for both the faculty and the medical students. but hopefully to produce great scholarship that impacts patient care and population health. If you want to scroll the next one, John. And then again, kind of down to things, Dr. Greenberg talked a lot about grant funding, et cetera. And I would second her point that any money is good money, and no matter the amount is helpful. Every little bit counts. And then I think the really big things, again, with looking for how do you synergize with what your institution has. It's really important to understand what's the institutional environment and where are our institutional strengths. So we have a ton of strength in informatics, in precision medicine, and population health with our insurance arm and our utilization folks. And so how do I find faculty interests, and how do I find and identify projects and collaborations within those institutional strengths? It's really challenging and difficult if you try to build a brand new silo in an institution where that silo is non-existent. Because again, the idea of this is to hop on a train that's already running down the tracks, not to lay the railroad tracks yourself, because that is really, from a practical approach as a pragmatic person, is nearly impossible in today's environment, and has probably, I think, I would argue, been impossible throughout our history as a specialty. It's really, really, really important to know the who's who in the governance and the regulations and the contracts office in large institutions and university settings. Just getting the right person in the right office to sign a contract or do a data use agreement can be a half FTE job sometimes, it feels like. So knowing who's who and developing relationships with those folks, although that's the very sometimes unpleasant part of research, it's completely fundamental and foundational and necessary. So it's really important to have that. And then finally, relationships with peer institutions. John, if you want to scroll just to the next slide. So many of you participate in Siren. We've had a great relationship with Temple University, so other large systems in doing regional work. Back to grant funding, this is a great way if you don't have all of the infrastructure or faculty to be NIH grant holders as a department or individuals yourself. It's a great way to have collateral money as sites for larger trials and larger collaborations. If you want to go to the next one, John. And then even, dealing with existing relationships. So this is a relationship that Geisinger has with a consortium of universities across sort of the Mid-Atlantic and Great Lakes, whereby these are other non-emergency medicine relationships, but that we've really been able to capitalize on and say, oh, well, to the folks in our grants and contracts office, well, we already have these existing relationships. Here's the next project we want to do, and provides us a really good opportunity. So go ahead, John. And so I'm not going to dwell too much on the faculty development part, other than to say it's really important to help faculty be mentored into a scholarly niche. So whether that's Dr. Greenberg talked about talks or EMS or whatever it may be, what are those niches and how do your faculty become experts? Some of that is through peer-reviewed publications. Some of that is through organizational leadership, et cetera. And I think the evolution of scholarship definitions will continue, but it's really important to help faculty find that area and focus on that area. Then it's extraordinarily important to have advancements within institutions. So like it or not, it is important to have more associate and full professors in your emergency department than it is to have assistant professors and instructors, as far as your footprint in the institution and in the university. And that doesn't mean you don't have instructors and assistant professors, but the goal is really to how do we advance folks not only in their academic appointments, but then how do we get people into the dean's office? How do we get people into the C-suite? How do we get people into the formal research structure, whether they're assistant chief scientific officers, et cetera, is really important. And then again, how do you sort of, again, create an environment and provide support? And then on to the next slide, John. I'll finish up quickly. Again, know your institutional strengths and limitations. So where are the trains that we can hop on and be great collaborators and leaders, and where are the places where it's going to be really hard to start a brand new line of research niche. Leverage the environment. So, you know, leveraging for us, the Geisinger name is really important. That's a name that people know. So we already, when we approach another institution to partner, or when we ask for funding, that name resonates. And so leverage that, leverage the environment, leverage that, you know, you have a grants office, leverage that, you know, that the institution may be able to provide you a part-time research assistant or coordinator. Again, innovate, don't recreate. So as a pragmatist, again, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm trying to build a better mousetrap. And then finally, celebrate those accomplishments as we talked about. So again, thank you, and I'll yield the floor to Dr. Ashurst.
Yes, thank you. So I actually work in a rural hospital, Kingman Regional Medical Center. It is in northern Arizona. We have a catchment area basically from the Hoover Dam to the Grand Canyon. ER visits about 50,000 a year. When I first came in, research was an afterthought. They knew that we had to do it because we did have at that time, an AOA, accredited EM residency. And as we transitioned into an ACGME accredited residency, there was a heightened approach to it. I kind of got lucky. So when I first came in, it was just me. I did everything. I ran stats, I designed projects, I helped the whole hospital do quality. And then I kind of got smart here in this last year. I was like, I'm doing way too much work. So I approached the hospital and I asked them, can I hire in a research team? And I basically laid out to them what all work I had been doing for EM, and also other things in the hospital, to kind of show them how much work I had been doing. So what we actually did was we hired in 2 PhD people, and so that's kind of the 2 arms. So there's the science arm, which is the PhD team, and then the medical arm. Because my PhD team, they have no medical experience in emergency medicine at all. And I hired them actually because of that. I wanted people who were good at analyzing data, designing projects, not necessarily the best at EM, but they knew the science of research. And it took a lot of convincing in order to hire both those people. And within that, so in the medical arm, so what we do is we use medical students, the trainees then, and then anyone who works in the ER. So anyone can give us the project, and it kind of comes to us, and then after we get that after I meet with them and we get that project refined, we take it back to the other people, the PhD team, and they come up with, this is the methods, how we should do it. This is a good lit search. These are the things that we should do. So I kind of have a little bit different, because most rural places won't have that PhD team. And actually, because of the work that we had done this year, I'm actually able to hire 2 more people in our area. So that's nice. We also have a tiered level of knowledge. So going along with that, so we have lots of medical students that rotate with us. I actually have 18 that are going to start on Monday. And this year alone, I'll have something like 80 to 100 medical students that rotate through our research area. And it's not just EM people. So we also, we'll take anyone who's interested in the research, and you're a medical student, we will take you. So I got some people who are coming who want to do IM, some who want to do HEMONC, and we will design a EM project around your interest though, because that's really what we want. And then our ACGME trainees also do research with us. So they have a designed research month that they do. So they do 2 weeks in their the PGY 1 year, 2 weeks in their PGY 2 year. And what we see is usually that last year, that PGY 3 year, they'll do a whole month with us. And and then there's the upper level like me and our PhD team who have extensive research knowledge. So I do things a little bit differently. So I do daily research meetings with my team, just to make sure that we're on task. And I tell them we want to accomplish one task every day. So in the morning, I'll meet with my entire team, and we'll say, hey, today we want to write an intro, or today I want to collect the data on 80 people. So we do that in the morning, and then immediately after that, because I have so many medical students, they get a 1 hour research presentation on a topic. It might be PPV or NPV, sensitivity, specificity. And so they'll get a 1 hour talk on that, because it's also about teaching and training that next group of researchers. And then at the end of the day, we again have a 10-minute meeting to see what we accomplished during that day. So it's just a little bit different. We do a monthly meeting also, where we go over, like, we talk about what projects and what conferences are coming up to make sure we are meeting our timelines and goals. So this is actually my research lab. So that was one of the first things that my PhD team did. They said, you need to be out there. So as a rural community hospital, basically they came in and said, no one knows about you. They don't know anything about Kingman. So we need to design something so you have your own lab. So this is our lab. And what they did is they made a Instagram page, a Twitter page, a Facebook page. So they are really good at getting out there and basically proving what we're doing at a rural area. And this has actually helped us out significantly because of some of the things that we were doing at our hospital. We now lead a community research network in Arizona, and we are the lead site for 10 different community hospitals. We also oversee a nationwide community hospital network also. And in that one, there's 19 community hospitals. So their strategy for growth. So when I said I want to hire in 2 PhD people into my ER, and the hospital basically said, so your growth is going to be dependent upon your outcomes, which is much different. Basically, I was given a couple-year window where I had to publish X amount of articles and bring in X amount of grant dollars. So that was one of the things. So my growth is also dependent upon what grants I can get. So I kind of did the math. It's going to cost us about $1 million over that period of time. And hopefully by the end of X years, I can recoup $1 million in order to prove that I met all of the outcomes. Much like we've been saying, you have to be out there, right? So that's why we're on all these different these things. We actually, because of where we are, we publish in the newspaper also. So that's kind of an old school thing. So whenever we win an award, get a paper out there, we make sure that we send out a blast email to the whole hospital, and we will also do interviews with like the town. Our town actually has like an NPR, and we'll be on there and we'll talk about it there. We'll go in the newspaper and give an interview. And so that's one of the most important things working at a rural hospital, is you have to be seen. That's an important thing. You must also be important to other places in the hospital, right? So with what happened this year with the COVID, we took on a lot of quality projects because you needed data fast and you needed numbers crunched, I had the perfect team to pull down the data at a very quick rate and give real-time feedback on how we could change outcomes. So that was one of the things. Whenever my PhD team came in, one of the important things was I made them join hospital committees because you have to be seen, right? So that we sit in our offices off our main campus. So we have a main campus, then we have a other campus where our GME is and our ER research people are. So no one really knew what we were doing. So we had to make sure that we were on as many hospital committees as we could. And the other thing is, we don't just do ER research. We do nursing research, like some of the falls. We do quality improvement on basically anything. So you have to have that interdisciplinary approach. So how did we get the cash to do this, right? So right now, everything is
Dr.
sponsored.
Ashurst, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if you can see the chat. We're getting about a 5-minute warning.
Okay, that sounds good. I will speed up. 2-minute warning. So the hospital staff, we are completely funded by the hospital and by grants. And from a research standpoint, I do have a budget, but like everyone is saying, any money that you can get is important. $1,000, $2,000. Some, my biggest grant was actually from a local donor to do community health research this year. So that's an important thing also. It's kind of the same thing. So it's so the upper level people design the ideas. My scientists have those ideas and they come up with a good hypothesis, but my students drive the projects. They are the ones who collect the majority of our data. And so just some pearls, you need to have that institutional buy-in, apply for everything, right? So that's my big thing. Every single grant cycle, we apply for every single grant. So we'll apply to all of them. Charge for everything that you can, right? So we do consulting fees. So if another department wants to pitch us the project, what we do is say, yes, it'll cost you 10 hours at $200 an hour, and you would pay us to come up with a plan to help you. And like we've been saying, is you have to present and publish everything. That is the most important thing, even negative results. Abstracts, everything goes to a conference and everything gets in a journal. So that's my big point also. And also my thing is you have to begin small, right? So I already had some of the groundwork laid, but you got to start with case reports, images, review articles before you get into the big retrospective and the leading big multi-site research. So that's all I have. So I'm going to leave it open to some questions, and I'll put my email in the chat also.
I like that you even got a domain for your email. Very impressive.
Correct. Yes.
Hi, everybody. Just wanted to say thank you for those presentations. I'm Assistant Medical Director at St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx, also a former AOA program, which is sort of the theme here. And we're sort of struggling to take our research off the ground here as well. And so I thank you guys for a lot of the points you made. One question I guess I would have is, our department really doesn't have any formally funded researchers. And so therefore we don't have any research associates, project managers, et cetera. And I actually took the ARMED course this year through SAEM. And some of it is dispiriting when you see how many resources other places have. So starting sort of from scratch, where we have no former grant funded researchers, what do you think is the first step to take so that you can eventually develop into somebody that can apply for an NIH grant? Or smaller?
Yeah, I don't know that you're going to go for an NIH grant first, but go, EMF or a smaller grant funded, a local community grant. And you have to watch those grants, but many times the grant will fund for the person. Once you get them there, then you start to compel, like John just illustrated very eloquently, this is what I'm doing for you. This has value. And I will tell you, getting a hardwired position is a fight uphill battle constantly for research. It is doable, but you have to almost prove yourself first, would be my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with that. So those big NIH grants. So it's going to take you probably 28 months to write a good NIH grant. So I'm also a graduate of the ARMED course. And I wrote an NIH grant during the ARM course, and I realized that I was nowhere near ready to apply for a NIH grant. I needed more of those small grants first to basically prove myself and get my name out there before I applied for that big $500,000, $10 million grant. So that was kind of my thought to it.
Yeah, the one thing, John, you mentioned was hiring the PhDs, which we actually attempted in the last couple of years, and was sort of didn't work out too well for us. Maybe it was the person more than the idea, but I guess you guys had a lot of success with hiring those. I mean, one of our big issues is getting stats, right? People have come with ideas, and then they're not super experienced. They don't know how to actually properly get the stat methodology down right, and so that's one other aspect that we're struggling with. I'm sure we're not unique in that regard.
That's a challenge even from the research directors interest group of SAM. We've tried to develop a list. We have a PhD, but the position does not require it. It requires a mid-level degree. So it could be a master's of public health, for instance. The stats is their epidemiology, is their guru. That is incredibly important to try to develop. It is a struggle. I'll get somebody for a year, lose them, have to try again. A lot of times we're using consultant fees for that, that is unlikely that you're lucky as much as John to get that as your hardwired position.
Yeah, and I got lucky that my PhDs, they taught stats at their colleges. So they can do stats. And actually SAM is telling me that we need to wrap up. So any other last minute questions?
You have our emails, we're happy to help.
Yep, and yeah, anything that you may need.
Come to the Research Directors Interest Group anytime or participate on the discussion board too. There's a lot of resources there.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.